another Python tutorial. Today we're diving into one of the most fundamental concepts in programming, that is actually data types. In Python, everything you work with like numbers, text, or even collections of data has a specific data type. Understanding data types is crucial because they help you know what kind of data you are working with and how to use it effectively. By end of this tutorial, you will not only learn about Python's built-in data type, but also understand when to use is on with practical example. So let's get started. First, let's understand what data types are. A data types define the kind of value a variable can hold. For example, the whole number like 5 or 100 are of type integer, and text like hello is a string. The best part about Python is that it's dynamically typed, which means you don't need to declare the type of a variable explicitly. Python does it for you. Let's now explore Python most common data types one by one, and I will explain when to use each. Numeric data types: integer, float, and complex. Python supports three types of numeric data. First one is integer, used for whole numbers; float, used for decimal numbers; and complex, used for complex number with a real and imaginary part. For example, let me declare some numeric type data. For example, here if we define is, and here this is actually a variable name, then we are going to assign it by using a equal sign. It's actually assignment operator. Then we will define a data, for example 25. It's a integer number. So if you check the data type of is by the following, you have to type print, then inside here you will define type, you will take a parenthesis, and inside this parenthesis if you pass the is, and then if you run your code, it will say it's actually integer type data. Here you can see class, then a space, and here int means it's actually integer type data. Integer type data is used when counting things like age or quantities of a product or something like that. Then let me define another data type, that is actually price. So price, then assignment operator, and here we'll define 19.99. So you can see it's a float type data, and we define a decimal point here. Okay, so if we just check the type of data, the price is here. Let me print type, and we will pass now price. Then we'll clear it and run our code again. Now it can say it's actually a float type data. And lastly, we'll check the complex number. So that's why z and then equal. Here we'll define 3 plus 4j. It's actually a imaginary number with a real number, and it's actually called a complex number. Okay, so it's actually used for advanced mathematical problems. So let's check the type of z here. So we will define z instead of price here, and now let me run the code. Here you can see it's actually complex number. Okay, so I hope you understand this is actually numerical number type data. And here let me define a comment so that you can check it later. So it's actually numeric data types. Okay, the next thing is that we'll have to talk about string data types. Okay, so for this, actually after doing this, let me add a comment. It's actually string data types, and for here string are used for to store text. You can write a string using single or double quotation. I will show you explicitly actually here. Let me define name, and we can just assign our name here. So equal sign, then you can use either double quotation or single quotation to define a string. For example, let me type my name, that is actually Mamun, and if we check here, for example, this is print, then we will pass type method here. So type, and inside this type we will pass this name. Okay, now if I run this code, you can see it's actually string type data. And after then what you can do, you can just define another string type data using actually double quotation. For example, you want to greet something, so that's why here is our greeting, then assigning to actually double quotation, here is actually hello Python developers, dev developers, okay, something like that. And now if we check the type of greetings, it's actually say the same thing, like here it will be the string type data. Let me run this code and see, this is actually string type data. And this time actually I will declare when to use this. Use string to store names, messages, file paths, or any textual data. So this will used for when you are working with names, messages, any text message, actually file paths, or any textual data. String are incredibly versatile. You can join them, slice them, format them for dynamic outputs. Now let's move to the collections, starting with list. So for this actually here I have to add a comments. This is actually list type data, list data types, and it's actually two variants, that is actually ordered and mutable. So lists are used to store multiple items in a single variable, and lists are ordered and mutable, meaning you can modify them after creation. So let's get some example. At first, let me define fruit, fruits, fruits, and here we'll store multiple items in a single variable. For example, this is our variable name, and we will assign multiple item using list item. So here we will take a square bracket, and inside this square bracket we will keep some fruits name. For example, apple, then we can store banana, then we can store cherry, and finally we'll have orange or something like that. Okay, so here you can see we have separated items by using a comma here. Okay, so this is actually list type data, and let me check the type of fruits here. So print, here we'll define type, it's actually method, and inside here we'll actually pass fruits. Okay, let me clear this and run it again, and see this is actually list type data. It's actually printing on the console. Then I said you can modify it after creation. So let's try to add another new item to this list. So to add a new items here, how you can do that, you can use dot notation for this. So let me define the variable here, then we will define a dot. This is actually dot notation, and append method is used for to add a items on the console. Then I said you can modify it after creation. So let's try to add another new item to this list. So to add a new items here, how you can do that, you can use dot notation for this. So let me define the variable here, then we will define a dot. This is actually dot notation, and append method is used for to add a items to the list. So for example, I would like to add mango here. Now if we just actually print fruits, you can see it will give output with all of these items including this mango. So let's run it, we'll run it. So it's actually not run it properly. Let me try again. You can see apple, banana, cherry, orange, and at the end we'll have mango. So that means we can just add a new item to the list, and here is the example we added. But what if want to modify any items? For example, you can change the fruit's name here. This is actually apple, and you can change it. So to change it, what you will have to do, you will have to define it using actually bracket notation. To do that, you will have to take a square bracket here, and then our list starts with indexing. So this is actually 0 indexing, this is actually 1 index number, this is actually 2, and it's actually the index value is actually 3. So if you want to modify this one, for example, you will have to define 0, and if you want to modify actually this one, you will have to define 1. So it's start with 0 and ends up to where you end your actually list. So for this, if you want to modify this, so you will have to use this way, and then assign something like that. You would like to modify its something. Okay, I'm just define something else. Okay, Now you can see it will replaced by banana. So let me just get output by running this code. Pills, then cherry, mango, sorry, orange and mango. So that means our list item is modified it here by using this word. You can write any fruit name here, but I just write something else. Okay, so that is the thing. After doing that, the next thing is that let me declare it when actually you use this list type data. So it's used actually when you need a collection of items that can change, like a to-do list or a list to define some products in the cart. You will have to define this list type data, and it's actually mutable. That means you can change it anytime. Okay, so next thing is that what if you need a collection that cannot be changed, that means it will be unchanged. That's why we need to talk about tuples. Tuples is cannot be changed. So that's why let me explore the example for the tuples. So we'll add a comment tuples data types, and that is actually worded, but it's actually immutable. Immutable means you cannot change it. So let's get it. So tuples are similar to the list, but it's actually immutable, which means you can change it after creation. So if you create one, then you cannot change it. For example, here we can just define a variable name actually, that is actually coordinates, and here you will define two values 10 and 20 for the coordinates. And if you just for example print, and you can check the type of coordinates and run your code, you can see it's actually tuple, and you cannot change it when it's actually created. And if you want another example, you can just check something like that. You will have colors, and then you will define, look, when we are just defining tuple, we'll have to use parentheses here. Then we will divide it actually the items using comma. Okay, so here we'll have some colors like red, then comma, then we will have green, then we can just store blue here. Okay, so now if you check actually the colors, we can just copy it, and now we can pass colors here. So this will actually do something like that. It's actually tuple type data. Or if you check actually the color, for example, let me just print it here. If we run it again, you can see red, green, blue. So output is something like that. It's actually tuple. So use tuple for fixed data like coordinates or constant setting that won't be changed ever. Now let's talk about set. Set is unordered and unique item. Set can't store unique and unordered list. They automatically remove duplicates. Okay, so let's get some example. So that's why at first we'll have to define a comment that is actually set data types. It's actually unordered and mutable. So let's get an example. For example, we will have some numbers. So that's why we'll define a variable like numbers, and here to define actually set types, you will have to define curly braces here. Then you can define some items for the set. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, something like that. Now if you just print it, so for example print, and if you print the numbers, what output you will get. So run the code, and now you can see this is actually set. And if you check the type here, you can just define type, and you will have to pass numbers inside the parentheses. Let me clear the data and run again. So you can see here is actually set data type. Remember, set can use when you just want to filter out duplicates, like tracking unique visitors to your website. The final collection type we will discuss is actually dictionaries. And for dictionaries, actually dictionaries store data in key value pairs like an object. Okay, so making it easy to organize and access information. So for this, what type you define, so let me add a comments. It's actually dictionary type. And for example, I will give an example for a users. So users must have a name, so you can just define it's by using key value pairs. So this is actually name, and this is actually key, and here you will define a value for this key. So that is actually my name, Mamun, and as a user I have is, so that's why here we'll separate it by comma, and it's actually is will define by using a clone here, the value will be 23. So you can use it number types because it could be number. And then for example, if you define address something like this, address, and here it will store a city, for example, New York, okay, something like that. So if you now want to print it, for example, let me print it dynamically. So that's why I take F, and inside these actually how to define it dynamically. Let me define curly braces, and here we'll pass user. Then if you want to get the value of name, you can have to pass it. It's actually use a square notation, and you will define name. After doing that, let me define lives in. Here we'll print city, so that's why curly braces. We'll have to get the city by using a square notation, and it's actually bracket notation. We'll define address. Okay, so now if you run your code, you can see Mamun lives in New York. So that is the actual data types for the dictionaries, and dictionaries is used for structured data like user profile, API response, or configuration setting. Now that we have seen all major data types, and let's discuss type conversion. Sometimes you need to convert data from one type to another. For example, if you want to convert number to a string by using this. So to do that, let me define it another file, that is actually second file, and we would define type conversion here. So let me define a comment at the top, that is actually type conversion. Okay, and you can just see it something like that, type casting. For example, we will have a is, and that is actually a string. So for example, it's actually 23. And now if we print the type of the is, so that's why type, and will pass is, you can see the terminal says is actually string type data. Let me clear it, let me run it again. You can see it's actually string type data. What if you want to convert it to a integer number? So to do that here, for example, you can do that by this way is, and if you want to convert it to integer, you will have to type int, then you will have to pass this is here. Okay, so now if you print, then you will see it's actually integer type data. And if you want to update your is something like that, you can update it by using this print is +1, as it's actually integer number. Now you can just do any mathematical operations here. Okay, so now let me run it. So you can see it's actually 24. Type conversion is common when you are working with user input or data from files. Let's warp up with a quick real world example. So for this real world example, let me define another Python file. So for example, it's actually 3.py. Here we'll work with all the above things we learned. So for this, at first we'll define dictionaries. So that's why we'll define a variable name, that is actually user data, and we will define a assignment operator, that is actually equal sign, and here we will define name, that would be the person name. So it's actually key, and here after this colon we'll define value, that is actually Johan, Johan. Then we'll define a age for the person. So age will be something like that. At the beginning we'll have to use a string value, then we can use any type of type. So for example 30. Then we will include actually hobbies. So hobbies, it would be something like that. It's actually list type data. So first thing is that reading, then we can just define another items, that is actually traveling, and as a programmer we can keep coding here at the end. Okay, so this is actually list type data, and after doing that we can add another type data, that is actually boolean type. So is underscore student, and we can pass true or false here. So this is actually for boolean type data, we missed that above. Okay, so now I just define it here. Now if you print it by using dynamically. So that's why we'll take a if at the beginning, then we'll have quotations, and here actually we'll have curly braces to print dynamically. we would like to access user data. So username, for username we'll have to define a square bracket. So this is actually bracket notation. Then we'll define name, and after doing that we'll have is. Then we would like to print is here. So that's why we'll have actually curly braces, and here we'll define user underscore, and we would like to print is. So that's why is years old. So this is the first text, and we also like to print hobbies here. So by doing that we'll have to do it dynamically. So a quotations, and here we'll define hobbies, and after doing that we'll dynamically print. So that's why we'll take curly braces, and inside here actually we can define a string with a space. Then we would like to join method, apply join method to join two types of data here. So we'll define user data, and we would like to define hobbies here. Okay, so let's check the codes by running this. So you can see actually Johan is 30 years old and hobbies reading, traveling and coding. So here we will use join method to join this list item that is defined above. So this is how you can combine string, integer, list and booleans to organize your information. To summarize, use integer for whole numbers, float for decimal, and string for actually text. Use list for mutable collections and tuples for immutable ones, and use sets for actually unique items and dictionaries for structured data. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel,